History of the Soul War by Eddieddi. Lesson 4. Humans Take Prisoners. The lecturer watched his class come in through the doors. He seemed a little more rigid than normal, less excited. His antennae were resting forward slightly, apprehensive. The class noticed the other tricle sitting at the back of the room, half hidden in the shadow of the holographic projector that was used to create the three-dimensional images of the presentation.
I am glad to see that the last lecture did not put you off overmuch.
He started, not his normal animate self.
Please be on your best behavior, as we have a guest from the Federation, second high of the historical records.
He gestured to the shadowed guest. With the requisite introductions out of the way, he dimmed the UV lights and opened to the first slide. Unlike prior lectures, where it was pictures or videos, this one actually had data upon it, a simple 10-year timeline.
The Soul War stretched for 15 years. However, the first 10 are the most critical. The final 5 years were primarily the humans dealing with rogue elements of both sides. Human ambassadors met with Federation peacemakers several times throughout them. There was an unofficial meeting when the Federation issued its demands for humanity to surrender. Humanity, however, responded with what they called the middle finger. The first official time was after 3 years after the first deployment of humanity's forbidden weapons. The second time was after 7 years to discuss the actions of Federation rogue elements.
The class politely remained silent, but there was some glancing at one another. The Federation didn't have any rogue elements. Maybe 1 or 2 piratical organizations or smugglers, but what interstellar empire didn't? And the Federation never involved any of them in the wars.
The third time was after 10 years, when the Federation formally withdrew from Terran space, although there was no declaration of cessation of hostilities. The final time was at the end of the war when humanity delivered notice to the Federation that it had finished cleaning up any rogue elements involved and was willing to negotiate a peace treaty.
As the lecturer spoke, the timeline behind him lit up, indicating each time humanity and the Federation had peace talks, as well as some other notable events. Earth invaded was one, Federation lunar base lost was another. He moved on to the next slide.
As I have mentioned previously, humanity has rules for war. One of these is mercy. If an enemy surrenders or is incapable of fighting, you may not kill them. Rather, they are to be captured and kept in a secure location until the end of the fighting. The Federation was not aware of this, so when a force was defeated and units lost due to enemy action, we were under the impression all troops were KIA. This is important for the first meeting.
He explained. The class nodded. In the near 2 centuries since the war, the taking of prisoners of war had become part of Federation doctrine. The slide that was now behind him was one of what looked like a collection of human dwellings. They were, however, surrounded on all sides by a heavy-duty wall and several guard posts. Between the dwellings were several tricol and torsec, as well as a single ordean.
This is a human prisoner of war camp, or POW camp, from the Soul War. According to the reports from captured troopers, they were treated well, given food to their specification, provided primitive tools and entertainment. Their dwellings all contained comforts equal to or better than human soldiers. The humans even provided them with what was at first appeared to be high-strength narcotics and addictive drugs in the form of caffeine and nicotine. It was later discovered, however, that these are consumed by humans with far lessened effects than tricol or ordean biology. A single cup of what humans call coffee is close to an overdose level for a tricol. However, a human could drink 10 cups in a day and not suffer caffeine overdose. This practice was quickly halted after human xenobiologists noticed the problem.
The students nodded. They'd all heard the rumors that humans made some of the best drugs this side of the Andromeda Galaxy, and a few that were unmatched in the entire cluster.
Humans, for all their fearsome abilities, also live by a unique creed. They will treat defeated or surrendering foes with respect and dignity, if you haven't broken their rules, and will expect the same treatment from their enemy to their surrendered men.
He clicked onto the next slide. The slide was the image of a meeting table. On one side sat 2 Scythians, wearing the ceremonial gemstones that marked them as Federation peacemakers. On the other side sat 2 humans, one male and one female. Both wore suits.
This is the first meeting between Federation peacemakers and human ambassadors. While the entire recording of the meeting is available, I will only be using excerpts, as the entire meeting is 4¼ demicircles long.
The class winced. To be stuck in a meeting like that for almost half a cycle. At least most lectures were only 2 demicycles long. He clicked a button on the lectern, and a section of the audio played. A human female voice started talking, while the universal translator converted her words into the normal clicks and chitters of the tricle. They could still hear her voice, firm and polite behind it. In regards to the event with the village and the children, she was cut off by the sounds of the Scythians speaking. Behind the universal translator, the bubbling humming that the Scythians used to communicate was far quieter than the human voice.
We have already explained. That was a rogue element. The Federation had nothing to do with it.
An exasperated sigh from the human male. What my partner here is trying to say, the human male cut in, is we are willing to exchange some of the prisoners we have. He was interrupted, this time by the sound of shock and spluttering from both Scythians. It sounded like someone slapping 2 wet fish together.
Prisoners? You have taken Federation troops hostage?
Came the voice of the other peacemaker, clearly shaken at the idea of such barbarity. The human female let out a snort of amusement. The universal translator translated it as antenna moved to indicate humor and derision. Not hostage. They are treated well and given medical aid. Since they are unarmed and no longer a threat, we see no point in harming them. Once the war is over, they will be released. We are suggesting, if you aid us finding these rogue elements, we will consider releasing them sooner, the female ambassador said, the derision and humor in her voice.
We have no idea where they are,
came the response, almost too fast from the peacemakers in unison. The human sighed, almost in unison. Then I think we have little else to discuss, the male human said. Both Scythians seemed to stumble a little.
So you will continue to use these, what did you call them? Loiter missiles? And angel's teeth?
Mm-hmm, came the female human. The universal translator converted it to antenna moved to indicate agreement. Until we have the perpetrators or evidence of the Federation's attempts to prevent such actions happening again, we cannot take your statements of them being rogue elements as fact. Seeing as there are reports of similar events happening, we will restrict ourselves to loiter missiles, angel's teeth, and phosphex weapons, as a show of goodwill. The sounds of chairs scraping and footsteps. I do hope that the next time we meet, circumstances will be more favorable. Good day. The Scythian seemed to splutter.
We bid you goodbye, humans. We hope your primitive shuttles make it down to your planet safely.
The human male voice responded. May you live in interesting times, and come to the attention of those in authority. The recording ended with a click. The lecturer let the class take a few moments to make any notes they wanted to, before resuming the lecture.
As you can see, humanity at the time had only just begun to use their forbidden weapons, and the rogue elements within Federation had already started to appear.
His tone remained measured and unchanged, his antenna unmoving, as if he was forcing himself to remain calm and controlled.
Humanity at the time made sure to move all non-combatants away from the areas with fighting. One of humanity's rules is not to involve non-combatants in fighting. This is why such a meeting was possible. The ambassadors are considered non-combatants, as are the peacemakers. Thus they can meet on neutral ground, an empty transport shuttle.
He pressed a button, and the image changed. It was the same location, but the humans were handing over a small data pad. The recording resumed. The human male this time. It would seem the Federation is unaware of the fact that humanity has certain rules for warfare. This datapad should contain them. The only reason you have seen the use of loiter missiles and angel's teeth is because those rules have been broken. The peacemakers looked a little shocked. After a few moments, one of them spoke up.
Rules? You regulate war? Why?
They looked through the datapad, as the humans explained, a very shortened version of why humanity had rules for war. The peacemakers spoke up afterwards.
You mean those weapons are not the limit of your capabilities?
The male human chuckled in response to the question. No, they are not. However, we do not wish to use them, as we consider them far too cruel to be used against reasonable foes. The peacemakers responded, having finished going through the rules.
I cannot see any of these that the Federation could have broken,
they said simply. The human female tapped her nails on the table. I am afraid we have reports of one of your squads of scalies. She was interrupted.
Are what?
Scalies. The ones with lizard-like... Oh, right. They have scales, eat leaves and grass, 3 fingers. She paused, trying to come up with more descriptors.
Torsec. They call themselves Torsec. Human.
The peacemakers informed her. Thank you. We have reports and evidence that a squad of Torsec troopers encountered a village of non-combatants, and upon becoming convinced that the village was somehow aiding the war effort, demanded they hand over their weapons and ammunition, as well as food. When the village refused, the squad gunned down several children in cold blood. The recording seemed to fuzz and crackle, as if it had encountered a data error. Then the voice of the peacemaker came through.
I see, Ambassador. I can assure you there are no such elements in the Federation force. Any such elements on the ground are rogue elements that have deserted the Federation force, and we are doing everything in our power to eliminate them.
The recording clicked off. The lecturer resumed.
As you can see, it was only after the rules had been broken that humanity made an attempt at explaining to the Federation what had caused the use of loiter missiles and Angel's Teeth. Unfortunately, these rogue elements were never captured till late in the war, and resulted in humanity escalating the use of their forbidden weapons.
He explained and clicked onto the next slide.
It is still unclear whether the rogue elements were rebel forces from the human POW camps or something else. However, the sudden change in human weapons and tactics resulted in a far more brutal war than the prior 3 years had seen.
This slide was a picture of a squad of Ordine, or the remains of them. Most of them were missing upper torsos or heads. Small craters around them indicated the use of Angel's Teeth.
The next lecture will be covering the rogue elements along with collecting any further questions that you wish to be answered in the lecture notes. Class dismissed.